First of all, I want to speak to Jonathan Davis. He's an economist. He's the creator of the Booms and Busts Finance podcast. What would you say would be... Let's start with the city's view of a Jeremy Corbyn-led government, Jonathan.
Actually, it'll be a bit mixed. On the whole, in the media, they will say, oh, we're absolutely against it. But the reality is, funnily enough, during periods of socialism, and this will surprise your listeners, but all they have to do is look at history, the stock market does very well during periods of socialism. Because what socialism tends to bring is much higher levels of inflation, and stocks and other similar types of assets do well in inflation. So that's why I say it would be mixed. That's the specific answer to that specific question.
Okay, fine. So you can understand the concerns of the super rich. The other thing he's talking about is tax avoidance. Is it possible for HMRC to plug all those gaps and loopholes?
If you're super rich, then no, you'd simply, as you've been describing for the last 5 or 10 minutes, you'd basically leave the country. You might go to the likes of the British Virgin Islands or somewhere like that. You might perhaps go to the Canary Islands, although that's not as effective as going far away. And you can, or Monte Carlo, of course, and you can come back to the UK about 90 days a year, and you're not taxed on income or capital gains, but clearly you can still have a life within the UK, but not all year round. So no, if you leave the country and only in effect come here for short periods of business or holiday, then no, HMRC have got nothing to do with you.
Now, I mentioned that it's sort of Middle England who tend to sway elections, whichever way they go.
And they are the ones who pay for all of it.
Right. Will you tell me why they pay for all of it and how they would be affected? Because if you listen to John McDonnell, he's basically saying Middle England won't be affected.
Yeah. Because, Ian, throughout recorded economic history, it's the middle classes that have always paid for the state. I've just shown you that the super rich can easily get away if they need to. You just read out the accountant who sent 10 families half a billion pounds out of the country, and they're living at large somewhere else in a tax haven. But Middle England, Middle Britain, we are the ones that will actually pay for it. We've always paid for it. John McDonnell says we won't be paying for it. What a stuff of nonsense. First of all, there'll be the renationalisations. Secondly, there'll be higher income taxes, higher inheritance taxes, higher capital gains taxes on assets. And then, as I say, in time, you'll find that the economic, quote-unquote, I call them really political policies of these communists will create bigger and bigger inflation, costs of doing business, costs of living, and of course our incomes will simply not keep up with the higher cost of living. Your listeners with some grey hairs will remember the 1970s when we had, and many of your listeners will not even know that this was possible, but in the United Kingdom in the 1970s, we had 20% plus annual cost of living increases. We've had sub 5% in the UK for more than the last 10, even 15 years. People can't imagine what life is like when you get to that level of superinflation under socialist policies. And that is why we had, and your younger listeners can ask their parents about the 3-day week, about the bins not being picked up, and we had to have candles on at night because there was not electricity. In the United Kingdom...
Don't forget the dead bodies in the street.
For example, the point being that there may not be any immediate change. Let me give you an example. In 1967, the Socialist Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, devalued the pound sterling by 14% overnight when governments could do that. And he went on television and he said, the pound in your pocket will not change. And he was right. If you had £6 in your pocket, you still had £6 in your pocket. But very quickly, everything you bought was 14% more expensive. And that's what largely contributed to the 20+% per annum inflation by the early 70s. But incomes were not keeping up. That's why we had such strife in the economy, such poverty from the working classes through the middle classes. And, you know, the likes of Sir Michael Caine, he left the UK because, as he'll always tell you, I can remember when taxes were at 98% in the pound. And exactly all of our clever, talented scientists, business people, artists, they all fled the country, and the rest of us had to get on with it. Well, I didn't. I was a kid at the time, but the rest of the people had to get on with it, and we struggled and struggled, and Britain became the sick man of Europe.
Okay.
That's what socialism brings.
All right, I think we've got the message from you, Jonathan. Jonathan Davis, economist.